Welcome to Bella's World, where real-life drama meets spicy secrets. Subscribe to never miss a new story.
I'm sitting in my lawyer's office, facing 5 years in prison for filing false harassment claims, when all I did was report legitimate workplace misconduct to protect other women from a predatory CEO. But apparently, the justice system protects rich, white men over victims like me. Riley, you need to understand the severity of these charges, my lawyer says, shuffling through papers with my mugshot clipped to the top. The prosecution has security footage, digital evidence, and witness testimony that directly contradicts your account. They're seeking the maximum sentence, 5 years in state prison. I can't believe this is happening. 3 months ago, I was being praised as a brave whistleblower who protected women from a workplace predator, and now I'm facing felony charges for allegedly making false accusations. The same justice system that should have protected me from harassment is now treating me like I'm the criminal. But I was trying to protect other women, I tell him. How is that a crime? He looks at me with that same expression everyone's been giving me lately, like I'm delusional. The evidence suggests you fabricated assault claims to eliminate competition for a CEO position. That's not protecting women. That's fraud. Before I explain how we got to this nightmare, please do me a small favor. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It really helps me feel less alone, knowing there are people out there who might actually understand my situation. Now let me tell you how my entire life got destroyed, starting from the beginning. I'd been working there for 4 years, putting in 60-hour weeks, taking on extra projects, doing everything right to position myself for advancement. When our CEO announced his retirement last spring, I knew this was my moment. The position paid $350,000 annually, plus stock options, enough to finally prove I'd made it in a male-dominated industry. I'd been strategically networking with board members for months, highlighting my contributions to major client acquisitions and process improvements. My performance reviews were stellar, and I'd completed my MBA specifically to qualify for executive roles. Everything was falling into place until they announced that Evan Martinez, some senior director from the finance department, was being fast-tracked as the likely successor. Evan had been at the company for 6 years and definitely had more traditional executive experience, but I couldn't understand how someone who just pushed numbers around all day was more qualified than someone who actually managed real projects and client relationships. The whole thing felt like another case of the old boys club protecting their own. When I voiced my concerns to my friend Caitlin from admin, she tried to be supportive, but I could tell she didn't really get how devastating this was for my career trajectory. "Riley, maybe there'll be other opportunities," she said when I called her crying after the announcement. "You're only 29. You have time to build up more experience." She meant well, but she didn't understand that opportunities like this don't come around often for women in tech. While guys like Evan get fast-tracked based on potential, women have to prove themselves 10 times over just to be considered. The board officially announced Evan as their preferred candidate in early June, and I felt like my world was crashing down. I'd invested everything in this opportunity: the extra education, the networking, the sacrifices I'd made to prove myself worthy of executive leadership. Seeing it handed to someone who probably never had to work twice as hard just to be taken seriously made me physically sick. I started researching similar situations where qualified women had been passed over for less deserving male candidates, and that's when I discovered how many of these men had histories of inappropriate workplace behavior that companies covered up to protect their investments. It made perfect sense that someone like Evan, who seemed to glide through his career without any real struggles, probably had some skeletons in his closet that the board was choosing to ignore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had a responsibility to investigate whether Evan had engaged in the kind of behavior that would make him unsuitable for CEO. If he had been inappropriate with female colleagues, the board needed to know before making such an important decision. I started paying closer attention to his interactions with women in the office, looking for signs of the subtle harassment that men like him often got away with. I began staying late when I knew Evan would be working, trying to observe his behavior when he thought no one was watching. I also started asking other women in the office casual questions about their interactions with him, framing it as general workplace culture discussions. Most of them said he was professional, but I could tell some were hesitant to speak openly about a potential CEO. The power dynamics made honest feedback nearly impossible. Has Evan ever made you feel uncomfortable? I asked Sarah from marketing during lunch one day. She looked confused and said, "No, why would you ask that? He's always been perfectly professional with me." But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, like she was second-guessing herself. That's exactly how these situations work. Women are conditioned to doubt their own instincts about inappropriate behavior. After weeks of careful observation and research, I realized that if Evan had engaged in misconduct, he was probably smart enough to hide it well. Men in his position usually were. The system was designed to protect people like him while silencing victims who tried to speak up. Someone needed to be brave enough to expose the truth, even if it meant putting their own career at risk. That's when I decided to file a formal complaint with HR and local law enforcement about the pattern of inappropriate behavior I'd witnessed and experienced firsthand. I knew it would be difficult, and that Evan's supporters would try to discredit me. But protecting other women from a potential predator in the CEO position was more important than my personal comfort. I spent several weeks documenting every interaction I'd had with Evan, reviewing email exchanges and text messages for evidence of inappropriate conduct. I also researched the legal requirements for harassment claims to make sure I presented the strongest possible case. The more I dug into his behavior patterns, the clearer it became that he had been systematically creating an uncomfortable environment for female employees. There was the time he'd sent me a message saying, "You seem really smart and interesting. We should grab coffee sometime," which seemed innocent on the surface, but had underlying implications given the power dynamic. Then there was the meeting where he'd complimented my presentation skills and mentioned how much he valued dedicated team members like me. The way he emphasized dedicated felt loaded with meaning. The incident that finally pushed me to take action happened during a late evening in July when I was working on quarterly reports. I had deliberately stayed late because I knew Evan would be there, and I wanted to observe his behavior when the office was mostly empty. Around 9 p.m., he approached me in the break room, and his demeanor immediately made me uncomfortable. He stood closer than necessary and said, "Wow, you're really dedicated to stay this late. I admire that kind of commitment." Then he added, "We should really get to know each other better, especially with all the changes coming up." The way he said it, combined with his positioning and the isolated setting, made his intentions crystal clear. When I tried to step away, he moved slightly to continue the conversation and made a comment about how ambitious women like me could benefit from having allies in executive positions. He placed his hand on my arm while saying this, which was completely inappropriate physical contact. I managed to excuse myself and leave, but I knew I couldn't let this behavior continue unchecked. I immediately went home and documented everything about the encounter while it was fresh in my memory. I also took photos of my torn blouse where he'd grabbed my arm and the bruises that were already forming. The physical evidence was crucial because men like Evan always claimed that interactions were misunderstood or consensual. I knew his lawyers would try to say I was making everything up, so I needed proof. The next morning, I filed detailed reports with both HR and the police, providing them with my documentation of the incident and the pattern of inappropriate behavior I'd observed over the past months. I explained how Evan had been systematically targeting female employees and using his position to create uncomfortable situations. I knew he would deny everything and try to paint me as a disgruntled employee upset about the CEO position, so I made sure to present objective evidence rather than just my word against his. The response was immediate and serious. HR launched a formal investigation and informed the board, who suspended Evan pending the outcome. The police took my statement and began their own criminal investigation into the assault charges. Within 48 hours, Evan was arrested at his home on charges of sexual assault and creating a hostile work environment. The local news picked up the story about a tech executive being arrested for assault, and I was contacted by reporters who wanted to interview me about corporate culture and the importance of speaking up against workplace predators. I felt a responsibility to use this platform to educate people about how these situations typically get covered up and why victims often stay silent. Women in corporate America face impossible choices: I told Channel 7 News during my interview. We can either stay silent and watch predators get promoted, or we can speak up and risk our careers. I chose to protect other women, even though I knew it would cost me everything. The support I received from colleagues and the community was overwhelming. Women reached out to share their own stories of workplace harassment and thanked me for having the courage to speak up. The board immediately removed Evan from consideration for the CEO position and began searching for external candidates while I was recognized as a brave whistleblower who had protected the company from a serious liability. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as it should when the justice system actually works to protect victims. The police investigation was thorough, the company took appropriate action, and the community supported survivors speaking truth to power. I finally felt like my career sacrifice had been worth it to prevent other women from experiencing what I had endured. But then the police investigation started turning in an unexpected direction. Instead of building a stronger case against Evan, they began questioning inconsistencies in my timeline and requesting additional evidence. They brought in digital forensics experts to analyze security footage and electronic communications, claiming they needed to verify details for the prosecution. Detective Morrison called me in for a follow-up interview and started asking really specific questions about timing and exact locations. You said the incident occurred around 9 p.m., but we need to nail down the precise time for the prosecution, he said. Can you be more specific about when he grabbed your arm? I explained that trauma affects memory and that I was doing my best to recall details from an incredibly stressful situation. I was focused on getting away from him, not checking the clock, I told them. Isn't the important thing that he assaulted me, not the exact minute it happened? The forensics team discovered that the security camera footage from the break room showed a completely different version of events than what I had reported. According to their analysis, my interaction with Evan lasted less than 3 minutes, with normal body language and conversation. They also found that my phone's GPS data showed I had left the office 30 minutes before the time I claimed the assault occurred. When confronted with this evidence, I explained that the trauma of the experience had obviously affected my memory of specific details and timeline. Sexual assault victims frequently have difficulty with exact recall due to the psychological impact of the attack. The investigators seemed to understand this initially, but they kept pushing for more precise details that I simply couldn't provide due to my emotional state. Look, I understand trauma affects memory, Detective Morrison said during another interview. But we have you on camera leaving the building at 8:27 p.m., and you're claiming the assault happened at 9 p.m. How do you explain that? I told him that maybe I'd misremembered the time, or perhaps I'd returned to the office later. The important thing was that Evan had created a hostile work environment and made me feel threatened. Are you going to let a technicality like timing prevent you from prosecuting a predator? I asked. They also examined the text messages and emails I'd submitted as evidence of Evan's inappropriate behavior, but claimed that the full context of these communications showed normal professional interactions. Apparently, Evan had provided them with complete conversation threads that allegedly showed my evidence had been taken out of context. But I explained that manipulative predators like him were experts at maintaining plausible deniability. The message where he said we should get to know each other better was part of a longer conversation about team building and cross-departmental collaboration. His comment about grabbing coffee was in response to my suggestion that we discuss project timelines. But the investigators didn't understand that predators hide their intentions behind seemingly innocent language. The medical examination of my injuries became another point of contention when the forensic experts claimed my bruises were inconsistent with the type of assault I'd described. They suggested the marks could have been self-inflicted or created with makeup, which was an incredibly insulting accusation to make against a trauma victim. I couldn't believe they were using victim-blaming tactics typically employed to discredit women who speak up. These bruises show a pattern consistent with makeup application rather than physical trauma, the medical examiner told the prosecutor. The coloration and shape don't match what we'd expect from the type of grabbing described in the victim's statement. I was outraged by this so-called expert testimony. Just because someone has medical training doesn't mean they understand the psychological impact of assault or how trauma manifests physically. Different people bruise differently, and the stress of the situation could have affected how my body responded to the attack. Most disturbing was their discovery of my internet search history, which they claimed showed I had been researching false harassment allegations and legal penalties for sexual assault. What they failed to understand was that I had been educating myself about these issues as part of my advocacy for workplace safety. Any woman in my position would want to understand the legal landscape before making such a serious report. The investigators completely misinterpreted my research about effective documentation techniques and evidence preservation as some kind of premeditation rather than the due diligence any responsible victim would conduct. They also claimed to find searches about how to fake assault evidence, which was absolutely false. I had been researching how predators typically cover up their crimes to make sure I didn't miss any important evidence. We found searches dating back 3 months before the alleged incident, the prosecutor said during my arraignment. Searches for sexual harassment law, maximum penalties, and how to document workplace assault, and CEO removed for misconduct cases. My public defender tried to explain that I was researching these topics because I was concerned about workplace safety and wanted to understand how to properly report misconduct if I ever witnessed it. But the prosecutor twisted my due diligence into evidence of some elaborate conspiracy. When they arrested me for filing false reports and perjury, I realized the entire system was rigged against women who dared to challenge powerful men. The same investigators who had initially taken my claims seriously suddenly treated me like a criminal for having the courage to speak up. The local media that had praised me as a brave whistleblower now covered my arrest as a scandal about false accusations. The charges against me were upgraded to felony level when prosecutors claimed they found evidence of premeditation and financial motive related to the CEO position. They alleged that I had deliberately fabricated assault claims to eliminate Evan from consideration for a job I wanted, which completely ignored the genuine pattern of harassment I had experienced and witnessed. This wasn't about protecting women, the prosecutor announced at a press conference. This was about eliminating competition for a $350,000 CEO position through false criminal accusations. The defendant spent months planning this elaborate scheme. The fact that they could take my legitimate concerns about workplace safety and twist them into some kind of career advancement plot showed how little the system actually cares about protecting women. They were more interested in protecting Evan's reputation than investigating whether he had actually engaged in inappropriate behavior. Evan was immediately cleared of all charges and reinstated at the company, though the board ultimately decided to hire an external candidate for CEO to avoid further controversy. The fact that my brave stand against workplace harassment had been twisted into some kind of career advancement scheme was absolutely devastating and showed how little the system actually cares about protecting women. "I'm just glad this nightmare is over," Evan told reporters after the charges were dropped. "I hope this serves as a warning about the damage false accusations can do to innocent people's lives and careers. The legal fees for my defense are bankrupting me, and I've been terminated from TechFlow for violating company ethics policies. Most of my friends and family have distanced themselves after the media coverage portrayed me as someone who made false accusations for personal gain. The isolation and betrayal I'm experiencing is worse than the original harassment I was trying to expose. Even Caitlin, who I thought would understand, stopped returning my calls after my arrest. When I finally confronted her at a coffee shop, she said, 'Riley, I want to support you, but the evidence they have is pretty convincing. Maybe you should consider taking a plea deal.' I couldn't believe that even my closest friend was turning against me. 'So you think I'm lying too?' I asked her. 'You think I would destroy my entire life over a job?' She looked uncomfortable and said, 'I think you got really caught up in wanting that promotion, and maybe you convinced yourself that things happened differently than they actually did.' My lawyer keeps telling me to prepare for the possibility of prison time, since the prosecutors are seeking the maximum 5-year sentence due to what they call the severity and premeditation of my alleged crimes. He doesn't seem to understand that I was trying to protect other women from a predator who was about to be given even more power over vulnerable employees. 'The evidence is pretty damning,' he told me during our last meeting. 'The prosecution has security footage, digital evidence, and medical testimony that contradict your account. Your best bet is to plead guilty and hope for a reduced sentence.' I fired him on the spot. If my own lawyer doesn't believe me, how can I expect a jury to understand that I was trying to do the right thing? The system is designed to protect men like Evan while criminalizing women who dare to speak up. The trial is scheduled for next month, and I'm facing multiple felony charges that could destroy my entire future. The same justice system that should have protected me from workplace harassment is now prosecuting me for having the courage to speak up. My mugshot and arrest video have gone viral online, making me a symbol of false accusers rather than the survivor and advocate I actually am. The worst part is seeing how this whole situation has been used to discredit other women who try to report workplace harassment. Every news story about my case includes comments like, "This is why we can't believe women," and "Another false accusation destroying an innocent man's life." My situation is being weaponized against genuine survivors. I still don't understand how trying to protect women from a predator makes me the criminal. This whole system is rigged against survivors like me.
Subscribe to never miss a new story.